After all the searching that has gone on, it's hard to believe that members of the Saddam Hussein clan could have been holed up at a cousin's house. But that's the story out of Iraq today. U.S. troops claiming a major success at last in tracking down and killing Uday and Qusay Hussein, sons of Saddam.
Well, still the big question was, how can we be sure? Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez said, with absolute certainty, we have killed Saddam's son.
And he said he'd fill in the blanks tomorrow. So if we can scratch number 2 and number 3 from the Pentagon's most wanted list, will number 1 be next? ABC's Sonia Crawford has more.
We're certain that Uday and Qusay were killed today.
Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez delivered the news anticipated all day. U.S. troops converged on this house in Mosul in northern Iraq after receiving a tip from a walk-in informant that Saddam Hussein's sons were hiding inside. After an intense 6-hour firefight, 4 Iraqis were found dead, among them Uday and Qusay Hussein. A U.S. military official tells ABC News this man, Abid Habib Mahmoud, Saddam Hussein's personal secretary and senior bodyguard who was captured last month, identified the bodies. Uday Hussein, Saddam's oldest son, had a lot of power in Iraq. He commanded the feared paramilitary group Fedayeen Saddam and has been accused by former aides, Iraqi dissidents, and intelligence officials of murder and torture. Qusay Hussein, the younger son, was one of his father's most trusted advisors. He oversaw Iraq's military, security, and intelligence operations and ran the Special Republican Guard.
The 2 sons were hated far more than Saddam, particularly the eldest son. For many Iraqis, knowing that they're dead and U.S. troops killed them is going to be a symbol that the U.S. is actually helping the Iraqi people.
Celebratory gunfire erupted in Baghdad as news spread about the deaths of Saddam's sons.
It's a great day for the Iraqi people and a great day for the American military, who once again showed their astounding professionalism in this operation.
The U.S. military is searching the house where the sons were killed for documents and other evidence that might lead troops to number 1 on their list, Saddam Hussein. Sonia Crawford, ABC News, Washington.
And on the same day that the Hussein brothers were eliminated, members of Iraq's new governing council were welcomed at the UN. We'll put both stories together tonight with the help of our guests. Farouk El-Baz is director of the Center for Remote Sensing at Boston University. He served as an advisor to the late Egyptian President Anwar Sadat from 1978 to 81. And Owen Cote is NECN's military analyst. He's also associate director of the Security Studies program at MIT. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. The consensus from virtually everybody is these killings were a very big deal. Why?
Basically because these 2 were very close to their father, and when the war ended and all 3 of them, Saddam and his 2 sons, disappeared, there was fear that they will escape the attention of the American military, and somehow Saddam might, with their help, come back again, and there was a great deal of fear about it.
So does fear dissipate overnight as a result of 2 of the top 3 being eliminated?
Yes, actually there will be a great deal of celebration in Iraq itself because of these 2, because as we heard that they were hated more than their own father.
Owen, what impact, if any, will the killing of Saddam's sons have on the so-called guerrilla warfare that's been going on since the end of major combat?
I mean, I think that's actually the really important question here, and we'll have to see in the next days and weeks. The administration clearly hopes that it'll have a dramatic effect. It's possible that it might not have a dramatic effect. I mean, Saddam was the leader. Saddam was the sort of symbol of the regime in a lot of ways, and so it'll be we'll have to see what happens.
I'm sorry.
Does this bring us any closer to finding the father, the number 1 guy on the most wanted list?
I mean, as we were talking before, the idea that these 2 guys were together, it's just crazy. I mean, but he wasn't there. If anything, this is going to cause him to redouble his efforts to keep his head down. And they're dead, so you can't ask him anything.
I want to get back to the question just for a second that Owen was answering, Farouk, about whether or not this will reduce the violence. It seems to me it comes down to, is the violence being perpetrated by Ba'ath Party loyalists, and in that case, assumedly it would reduce it, or are these independent forces who are just upset about an occupation and those sort of things, in which case it shouldn't have much effect at all? Which is it?
I really believe that it will have absolutely no effect whatsoever on the violence.
Why is that?
Because the people that are fighting all of these things right now are people that were disowned by the occupation and feel rejected, and they lost their jobs or lost their money, and they no longer have any hope for getting back to what they were. And so I really think that as far as the Iraqi people are concerned, the vast majority right now are under duress, and they feel that this is an occupation that they don't want. The Americans came here to change the regime. They came, and they better leave now, and let's have at it.
And yet there was apparently some celebration in Baghdad today, some celebratory gun firing in the capital city.
Yeah, clearly for some people, for many people, this is a big victory for them. It's a big victory for us. But I agree that the people that have had the sort of gumption, if you will, to engage in these attacks up to now, one suspects they're people that don't feel they have much of a future with our, sort of the regime that's being installed now.
Can we switch gears for a couple of seconds? The UN, that is not formally involved in this, recognized, for lack of a better expression, the Governing Council, the 25-member Governing Council over there in Iraq. Is that the first step towards the UN becoming more deeply involved in the peacekeeping here?
I certainly hope so, because we have gone too long alone, and we need the United Nations, we need other countries, we need other countries to bring in arms, we need other countries to bring in forces, and only through the UN could we get that.
How does George Bush do it without losing face? I mean, for example, India, we know, he thought was promising 17,000 troops. Lo and behold, they said, you'll get the 17,000 as soon as the UN's involved. That didn't cause him to move. Why should he move now?
Only because of the fact that it's going to be impossible for us to continue the way we are. There is not enough troops, so we don't have enough police. The Arab countries are not contributing anything. The rest of the world is not contributing. We're keeping all of NATO aside from us, and that it doesn't work. He will recognize that to get the right thing done in Iraq, we need the United Nations.
Oh, and it's got to be painful for George Bush, President Bush, to admit to the UN that we can't go it alone, and we're going to have to look to the UN for some help.
I'm sure it's painful, and there's going to be more pain to come, because what's really driving this is that almost half, maybe in some definitions more than half of the U.S. Army is in Iraq right now. Other parts of the Army are deployed elsewhere. To sustain this, as we clearly are going to have to, maybe even at a larger level into next year, into the following year maybe, we just simply can't do that with the forces that we have now. And the Army, we will literally run the Army into the ground. All these people, when their time comes to re-enlist, will say,
Was it
goodbye.
purely about saving face on the part of the president? Is there any other reason either of you can think of as to why the president hasn't acceded to both Kofi Annan's desires as well as Colin Powell, most people think, to have the UN have a greater role? What else could there be?
Only because the military or the civilian leadership of the military believes that their plan was perfect, and they had enough people. The people that said we needed more troops are not right, and we had a beautiful plan, and everything worked, and they want to proceed with that. And everybody is recognizing a bit at a time that that is not true.
Well, it's got to be obvious to them that the post-war plan has crumbled, whatever it was.
Remember about this administration also, there's a real obsession with control, and there's a fear that any kind of real international cooperation is going to lead to a loss of control. Which it will, but they simply have no choice, because we are going to literally run out of steam this winter with the Army. It just can't be done.
I heard one military guy quoted the other day saying that there are only 3 brigades of the U.S. Army available to go to any other potential trouble spot in the world.
If you go through and you look at what we need to have available to go and replace the people, some of whom until quite recently had been in Iraq or in Kuwait for 9 months away from their families. If you look at what we have to do to rotate people in to replace them, if you look at what we're already doing in the Balkans, if you look at what we're doing in Afghanistan, again, let's not forget that. Here's a country, Korea, for example, that actually has nuclear weapons probably and is certainly about to get more. You don't have to hype that WMD threat. And we have only a division available to reinforce there. So it's a very, very tight situation.
In the last 24 hours, the Center for Strategic and International Studies has come out with a report, and they were asked by the Defense Department to do this. It basically says critical that the major good news happen in the next 12 months, more important that there be major advances in the next 3 months that ensure that the Iraqis have more ownership over these issues, there's more democracy, or all hell's going to break loose. Does a respected organization like that stepping in, particularly at the Defense Department's request, make a difference?
No, just making maybe preparing the road for the Defense Department to recognize what is happening here.
And they're talking about more international cooperation in their conclusions as
Definitely.
well.
Any thinking person right now would talk about international cooperation, because there is really no way for the U.S. to continue to do that alone.
What if Tony Blair gets involved in this? What if Tony Blair decides to be the one who's going to suffer the embarrassment?
Tony Blair,
and he stands up and says, I believe we need a broader coalition.
Tony Blair has said that twice, and he is after getting NATO involved more than the UN right now. But I really think he will consent to the fact that the UN is even better than just starting with NATO.
Would you expect, Owen, that the French and the Germans perhaps might make the United States squirm just a little bit before they agreed to, even with the UN urging, go in to help in Iraq?
There might be some of that, but I think that Jim's right. I think that the CSIS is run by a former Deputy Secretary of Defense, John Hamre, and John Hamre ran this study. You can clearly see what's going on, which is that they're trying to get the sort of democratic side of the national security world to embrace what they have to go forward and do and kind of give them some cover here. But I think that there's no way for them to go forward and maintain what they had, the control they have to maintain without substantial involvement by whether it's Germany, France, India, Turkey. These are all countries that we've heard mentioned. They have to do it.
So very, very quickly, is the UN involved, and if so, how soon?
I personally believe that the UN will have to be involved within 3 months at the most, because right now the situation is unsustainable.
All right, let's get your comment on another major Iraq story from today. Former Iraqi prisoner of war Jessica Lynch returned home to a hero's welcome. Lynch received a standing ovation as she entered a media tent and made her brief remarks. Private Lynch said she had read thousands of stories recounting that when she was rescued, she told U.S. Special Forces that she was an American soldier too. Those stories were right. Those were my words. I'm an American soldier too, she said. That was quite a day for a small town and for Private Jessica Lynch, don't you think?
Absolutely.
It's, you sort of, heart goes out to someone like that. They've just had, it's just kind of a twofer. You just have this real disastrous thing happen to you, broken bones everywhere, POW, and now, you have your sort of Andy Warhol 15 minutes. I mean, the media attention to this sort of poor person, I hope she's holding up underneath.
In all fairness, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
In all fairness, they haven't sought it. I mean, to the credit of the parents,
right.
Long before it became
Right.
clear that she hadn't stood up to an ambush, long before it became clear that she didn't need to be rescued in as dramatic a fashion as she was, the parents were saying, we want privacy with our daughter. I mean, that really says a lot.
I think the family
does.
did a wonderful job. I think the family was one of the best, they performed in the best possible way. They were very nice, and they were right on the nose for dealing with the situation.
And before she left, she was awarded the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and a POW medal. And I think she's going to ask for a discharge, I heard someplace.
That's right. Well, anyways, it was, she's been through a lot.
And she's not even looking for her own radio talk show, which
No,
is really
no.
unbelievable, isn't it?
All right, our thanks to Owen Cote and Farouk El-Baz.
Coming up, bloodshed in Liberia and questions about the next mission for U.S. troops.
Bodies